Hi, everybody. I am here with my favorite member of Congress. I'm very, very biased. My very old, not in age, but in longevity of how long I've known him, friend and former boss, and just all around fabulous person, Frank Pallone, Congressman Pallone
Well,
from
thank you.
this, yep, from the sixth district of New Jersey. But most importantly, for the topic of this conversation, is not how I feel about him, although I could go on for the next 5 hours. It's really about the fact that Congressman Pallone is the former chairman and now the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the committee that has been targeted by the Republicans in Congress and by this administration to cut Medicaid, which is just, before we get to anything else, Congressman, I want to ask you, we have a budget deadline, a CR deadline that needs to be passed by the end of this week. What are they doing with Medicaid? Are they actually going to do it?
Well, I don't want to confuse the two, nor do I want to sound like a bureaucrat, but the
Right.
two are not necessarily related, right? In other words, the annual appropriation or spending bill is what ends on Friday, March
Right.
14th. And if we don't pass something, then the government shuts down. But that is separate from the budget reconciliation bill,
Right.
which is basically a way of trying to, you know, cut taxes for billionaires and large corporate interests, and accomplished by, in a major way, by cutting Medicaid significantly, which is a terrible thing because of all the negative consequences to seniors, to children, to people with disabilities.
And do you think they're actually, because they passed this budget blueprint that really targets your committee more than it targets anything else? What do you make of that? Why Medicaid? Is it just that they think it's a program for poor people that they don't care about? I mean, so many of their own voters rely on Medicaid in rural areas, veterans, I mean, so on and so forth. Why Medicaid?
I think they're under the false impression that they can sell that to the public. In other words, that Medicaid, unlike Medicare or your private health insurance or the Affordable Care Act, for example, is somehow for poor people. But my experience, talking to my constituents and also polling that's been done shows very much the opposite. That people understand that 60% of seniors in nursing homes are paid for by Medicaid and not Medicare. That almost 100% of people with disabilities receive their health insurance and all kinds of programs like group homes and their work that they accomplish is paid for in part by Medicaid. That children, something like in New Jersey, 30 to 40% of the kids that are born are on Medicaid, and then for the next year or so, the mothers are on Medicaid. And so, while it's true that a lot of people get their basic health insurance through Medicaid based on their income, a lot of other things are funded by Medicaid that are not necessarily income based. But we've also expanded Medicaid to higher levels of income, not really high, obviously. So most of the people that are on Medicaid who get it for their health insurance are working. Overwhelmingly, they're working. I guess we used to call them the working poor or working people that don't get health insurance on the job. Um, so they're not going to be able to sell this idea that we're just cutting health insurance for poor people, although they are doing that as well. I'm not suggesting they're not, and that's sort of a value judgment on their part as well, Julie. Right? If you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because if you look at the states that predominantly have more people than others using Medicaid, I mean, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, his state of Louisiana, is disproportionately has a huge number of people who are on Medicaid. And it's kind of, I guess, shocking, but not surprising that
Yeah.
that they're kind of screwing their own constituents, which is
No, I mean, if you
yeah,
take a state like New Jersey, right, some of the highest numbers of Medicaid percentage-wise in congressional districts are in where the Republicans are, right? You know that Jeff Andrews' district, which is the very southern part of the state,
right.
has the highest number of Medicaid because it's rural. It's an area that has a high unemployment. And you find that all over the country. Like you said, the speaker himself in Louisiana. But the other thing too is that in those states, those red states many of the red states, I think there are 9 or 10 that expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, have these triggers that say that if the federal government pays less than 90% of the cost, they will automatically get rid of the expansion, and millions of those people would automatically not have health insurance anymore because the federal government's paying for 90% of it.
You lay this out, and then I think people are rightly horrified by it and appalled by it. And then the number one question when I was promoting this chat that we're having, that people wanted me to ask, and not just of you, but of every member of Congress on the Democratic side, is okay, we've diagnosed the problem, but what are you guys doing about it? Because there is a CR that needs to be passed by the end of this week. Um, I don't know if the Republicans can do it on their own. And yet, you know, eh, they will need some votes from the Democrats. Are Democrats prepared to keep the government open despite the fact that all of these things are on the horizon? The fact that the Republicans are always repeatedly counting on Democrats to bail them out every single time. Is this going to be another time when the Democratic caucus is going to is going to bail out the people who brought us this mess every time?
Well, it's not clear. In other words, clearly the Democratic leadership and myself and all those that we can influence are very concerned about the CR because, the Republicans, again, are giving the impression that it's just a continuation of the levels of funding that we've had for the last 6 months. But in fact, it isn't, right? So, and I don't want to go on too much about it, but for example, if you were going to continue the level of funding for healthcare, like community health centers, teaching health centers, diabetes programs, all these different things, you would have based it on the level of funding for the last 6 months for the fiscal year. But instead, they're using March of 24 numbers instead of March of 25 numbers. So it's actually a cut. And I don't want to not answer your question, but I want people to understand that they're giving the impression, the Republicans, that it's just a continuation of the same funding levels for healthcare and everything else, and it's not true. It really isn't. It's actually a cut in many areas. But it may be that they have the votes to pass it on their own without us, Julie. It's possible. I mean, they have a majority, and if almost everybody who's Republican votes for it, it will pass.
Well, if that passes, and then we get to the next, whether it's, as you said, the tax on Medicaid or all these other things. I mean, I think there's a huge frustration among Democrats, and I'm not just talking about people who complain because they complain, but I mean, this goes deeper. This goes to people who've been establishment Democrats. This goes to people who truly have tried to work within the system. That a lot of people on the Hill right now are not listening to what they're saying, which is no compromise with any MAGA Republicans anymore. And I think, look, I have known you for so long. You have been truly somebody who just you don't go on TV to go on TV. You don't go, hold press conferences to hold press conferences. You are the ultimate workhorse, which is why you were responsible
Well,
for so
thank
much
you.
good. But you truly are. But I think at this point, what is the are we still trying to work within a system that's trying to effectively eradicate everything that we've ever cared about? Or are we trying to just say to them, you know what, you guys broke it. It's the Pottery Barn rule. You broke it. You own it. You guys are on your own. We want nothing to do with you. Pass what you can on your own, but we're not coming to bail you out on anything. I mean, if you were in the Senate, there'd be an argument that you shouldn't vote to confirm any of their appointees, if they're, or anything else. So where's the mentality, I guess, not just from you, but with Democratic leadership now, with Hakeem Jeffries and others, is the notion that we're still trying to work to make something slightly better, or are we just shutting it down and saying, if you guys want to do this, just do this on your own?
I think the idea is we'll work with you, as you said, if you make it better, right? So, as an alternative to this, this continuing resolution, even though it really isn't because it's a cut, we've been asking to negotiate with them on a regular spending bill that we would normally do in any year. And that would involve, rather than cuts in healthcare, for example, increases that reflect inflation and also what needs to be done to improve people's lives, right? But so far, we're not getting that at all, right? In other words, they're just saying we're going to pass this CR, which has cuts, and we're not interested in your views. So I think the answer is, if you're going to continue, firing federal workers, putting up 25% tariffs on our immediate neighbors like Canada and Mexico, and you're going to, cut Medicaid, the answer is no, we're not. We're not doing that. But we're still willing to work with you if you can come up with something that actually improves people's lives. I mean, look, the economy is falling apart. I mean, and not that I want to look at the stock market, but today was the worst day ever.
Awful. Awful.
And it does reflect to some extent the fact that people are fearful of a recession. They don't want to make investments. They don't want to buy things. They want to hold on to the money because of fear of recession. And, all of this is being imposed through Trump and Musk's policies that don't do anything to improve people's lives. They just don't.
And what's the line, right? Because you just said a few things, right? You're imposing tariffs on our neighbors, Mexico and Canada. You're cutting Medicaid. I assume there's foreign policy considerations about what's happening in Ukraine, which we'll get to in a moment. But there are considerations about potentially kicking Canada out of the Five Eyes until
Sure.
there's so many lines that have been crossed. I guess the question for me and for a lot of people, and this is a discussion that people have at least here on my Substack all the time, and I know every time I go on TV, this comes up as well. What's the line? Like you keep saying that, and this is not on you, but really on the Democratic
Yeah.
caucus, that you'll work to make things better. But at which point do you say, look, you have crossed the Rubicon here, whether it's the tariffs or Ukraine or any of the hundred other things that we can talk about, Musk, Doge, firing all the federal workers, cutting Social Security, effectively cutting Social Security because they're firing all the people that can help you with your Social Security. At which point where do you cross that line where you say, we just can't do it anymore on anything? We're not going to
I
work with
guess
you on
the
anything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the bottom line is I continue to be an optimist and hope that at some point, the President Trump changes course and realizes that these policies are hurting the country, hurting our position in the world, our national security, the whole list. But it's you can't work with him, effectively unless he starts to change his policies because we don't believe in these policies, and so we're still fighting and trying to convince Republicans in the House and whoever will talk to us that we're open to moving the country forward, but we can't do it in a situation where all you're doing is just President Trump is destroying everything. I mean, today Musk actually said that he's going to target Social Security, regardless of the fact that Trump says that will never happen. He said, "I'm targeting Social Security." So
Well, he thinks it's a Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, he's been very
yeah,
clear that he said it's a
yeah,
Ponzi scheme.
exactly, exactly. I mean, I'll talk about whatever you want, but I just want to make it clear that I don't hold out hope that at some point the Trump changes his policy and starts to do things that are actually help the economy, make things more affordable, go back to us where we're taking a leadership in the world, pro democracy. But as long as he continues to do the opposite, you can't work with him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the real question is at which point, I guess those are your votes, right?
No, that votes are
No,
over. That says they're going into
oh, four.
until tomorrow. They're
Oh, okay.
adjourning.
All right. So he's it's interesting to me if you're you, right? You're the ranking member of one of the biggest committees that oversees some of the biggest federal spending programs that we have. And yet, who do you negotiate with? Do you negotiate with your counterpart, the chairman? Do you negotiate with the White House? Do you negotiate with Elon Musk? Like, who's the decider here on the Republican side that somebody like you who actually wants to make meaningful change talks to? Do you even have anybody to talk to? Like, who do you?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question because what I have seen so far is that the chairman of my committee, my counterpart, the Republican, keeps saying he wants to do things bipartisan, and he has actually talked about some things that are right, but they're for the most part on much smaller issues than the things that you and I are just talking about now, right? And I seriously question whether or not, even if we were able to come to an agreement on some of the issues before the committee that are still important, that he would be able to carry that through on the House floor with the House leadership. So let me give you an example. We're going to have I'm very strong on environmental issues as well as healthcare. So one of the bills that I did years ago, it was bipartisan, was a brownfields legislation to clean up brownfield site. That expires I think at the end of this year, maybe next year. And so the chairman of the committee said, well, let's have a hearing on brownfields because we need to reauthorize brownfields. So sure, of course, let's have a hearing. Let's come up with a bill, reauthorize the program. But let's assume that we do a bill and it comes out of the committee that actually reauthorized. It has, good levels of funding to clean up sites and everything. Is that now going to pass on the House floor, or would it even be brought up? I think that's a big question. So what I'm saying is, yes, there are people to talk to, and there are things that you can do in committee. But I'm like, on the one hand, okay, we're going to do a brownfields bill, but next week you're going to have $1 trillion in cuts for Medicaid. So what are we doing here?
Well, and not just that, but what if you get to a deal on the brownfields bill? I'm just using that as an example, and then you cut the deal, and then Donald Trump says, "I don't think so,"
Oh,
because he woke up one day, and then like it's kind of a waste of your time
or
in some
Musk,
sense.
or Musk.
Or Musk, even worse,
Remember
or
that?
Musk.
Yeah, because
So,
remember we had an end of the year spending bill, and he came in and killed it. It was Musk who killed it and said,
so, so
"Yeah,
what? Isn't that kind of a waste of your time? Like, what's the point?
you could argue that." And but again, I'll go back to what I said before, which is you don't want to give up hope, but you're certainly right that it's not looking too good right now. I don't know what else to say.
I mean, you've been in the house since 1988.
That's right.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, absolutely not. And
Not even in the
and
first term for Trump, right? Like it's
no,
gotten even crazier.
no, and I'll be honest with you. As much as we're talking about healthcare, and I certainly want to, the bigger concerns, because it threatens, our world and the future of the world, is this denial of climate change, and repealing everything that relates to that, and then also the national security issues. We built up. I don't want to act like a historian here, but you know as much about this as I do. We built up this alliance to protect. As in the aftermath of World War II, so that we would not have another dictator like Hitler or Stalin arise. Now we have Trump saying, "Oh, Russia's great. Russia's not the aggressor. Ukraine is the aggressor." And I'm not sure the president says, if I want to continue with NATO, unless we don't play much of a part in it anymore. I mean, this is so dangerous. Do you see how countries like that historically denied the use and didn't want nuclear weapons, like Germany, are now saying, well, maybe we have to have nuclear weapons. I can't believe that Japan, which, as you know, went through Hiroshima and was attacked in the bomb and was totally opposed to nuclear weapons. There are actually people in Japan now that are talking about the need for nuclear weapons because of what's going on. It's a very scary world.
Well, here's my theory, and you tell me. It strikes me that effectively, and you were in Congress for this, but in the 90s, Bill Clinton negotiated very painstakingly negotiated the surrender of Ukraine's nuclear weapons. They had the third largest stockpile after Russia and the United States at the collapse
Hmm.
of the Soviet Union, right? And then after it took a few years, but after a lot of work and a lot of twisting arms, the UK and the United States came up with a deal that Ukraine was going to surrender their weapons in exchange for us guaranteeing their sovereignty and their territorial integrity, right?
Exactly.
That's gone. We just
Right.
reneged on we just reneged on that. And you raised an excellent point, which is not just that this is some far off country on the edge of Europe that we don't have to think about. And as Trump says, we've got this big, beautiful ocean, as he calls it, right? Because I'm not sure if Trump is aware of what an ICBM is or even what a medium range ballistic missile is. But it strikes me, as you said, it's not just allies like Germany and Japan who are now going to potentially go nuclear. It's people like countries like Saudi Arabia,
Exactly.
certainly Iran. If I'm Iran, my God, the first thing I do is reamp my nuclear program because clearly everything's out of control. Egypt. I mean, countries that are not particularly stable, that are not run by particularly good guys, people who we transact with, and but not always on the same side. They're going to go nuclear because they're going to understand that the protection, that the nuclear umbrella protection that the United States gave them all these years is out the window. We're not going to protect somebody we cut a deal with like Ukraine. Why would we ever protect anybody again?
There's
So
no
to
question.
me, yeah, I mean, right? Am I
No, there's
wrong
no
about that?
question. There's no question that places, you mentioned, more unstable places. There's no question that the Germans and the Japanese are looking at the Ukrainian example and saying, we need to have the nuclear umbrella in order to protect ourselves. That's exactly what they're looking at the Ukraine example.
But it's not just, as I keep saying, it's not just them, it's the
No,
bad guys too. And what are we, you think Trump is going to tell Mohammed bin Salman, his buddy, who's God knows how much money he's given to different Trump entities and certainly to Jared Kushner and whoever else, you think he's going to tell him not to go nuclear? I'm sure he'll say,
no.
go ahead.
And they're not going to listen to him anyway after the
Yeah.
Ukraine example. Why would
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Yeah. Taiwan. I mean, my God, Taiwan, if I were Taiwan, I'd be looking seriously at going nuclear right now with everything that's going on.
Sure. And these
Um,
places, have, I mean, they're, many of them are economic powerhouses. They have scientists and the ability to
yeah.
develop the weapon. And the only reason they haven't is because they felt the U.S. was going to be protective and they were part of an alliance with us. And now they're going to say, obviously, that's not the case anymore.
So what do you do? Because you're it, right? Like you and the couple of hundred other Democrats in the House and Senate are the people that I think all of us are looking to say, well, we don't really have the power ourselves to be able to. You have the votes, you have the power to do something about this. What can you do? I think there's such a cry for help. I think from the grassroots, but also just from regular rank and file people who come to town halls and they beg you guys for help. What can you do? I mean, what
Well,
can you and the minority do?
I think right now the main thing is public opinion. In other words, I do think that Trump, in all his vanity, wants to think that everybody likes him and is, supportive of what he's doing. And as that changes, which I have no doubt it will, you have to hope that we can influence him and the Republicans in the House and the Senate to say this is not working, and before it gets even worse, change course, right? And again, I think the biggest example of that right now is the economic picture, right? I mean, when I was home this weekend, whether you were Democrat or Republican or rich or poor, everybody, not everybody, but so many people said to me, and many of them were Republican, I am very concerned about a recession. I'm very concerned about, the Trump policies taking us into a recession. And I do think that, that may influence him to say, we can't go this route, and the other Republicans as well. Um, that's the most important thing to do right now. I mean, obviously, we have lawsuits to try to stop some of his policies, and that's working to some extent. But I really think the most important thing is changing public opinion.
Do you think the courts can enforce it? Because to me,
That's
most
another
of
question.
that, and what
Yeah,
happens then? Like, what do you guys do then? Because he's effectively taken over the legislative branch. I mean, not
yep,
the Democratic side, but they've abdicated complete responsibility and complete authority to Elon Musk, which is,
yeah.
they're begging Elon Musk to give money back that they appropriated themselves. I mean, nothing was more embarrassing than I think it was a senator from Oklahoma. I forgot where it was.
No, he's
Basically,
the chair. Well, I think you're
yeah.
talking about the guy who's the chair of the House
Oh,
Appropriations.
sorry, the House Appropriations
Yeah,
Committee.
yeah.
That's right.
Who
Yeah, who was like
is
thrilled that Elon
just
Musk. Yeah,
literally was complaining about, I think, a Social Security office closing in his
yeah.
district. And I mean, how outrageous that you're the one that appropriates the money for these offices. And now, because he's closing it contrary to what you legislated, which is illegal and unconstitutional, and you're sending him a letter not to close the office in your district. I
So
mean,
based on everything we just talked about, I mean,
yeah.
literally everything we just talked about, is there really one member of your caucus who, after everything that we just said, is actually seriously considering throwing a vote to the Republicans, either for the CR or for any budget resolution, for anything down the pike, on
I think it's
anything?
possible. I hope that we don't have anybody or that the numbers are very few, but it's possible you will get some that will support it. Yeah, but
And
we'll
is
see.
it?
Well, no,
Is
by tomorrow's the vote is scheduled for tomorrow. So
Yeah, I mean, it's just astounding to me that based on all of this, Congress, which again is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government, apparently is not acting like one, and there may be even Democrats who, I guess, are
we
okay
have
with
to
that.
hope not, but we'll see.
Well, there's also, and I don't know much time with you. We've got three elections coming up. Two of them are in Florida. One is for Matt Gaetz's old seat, and there's one
Yes.
more. I don't know. I'm not going to ask
Iowa,
you to.
maybe. I think one is in Iowa. I'm not
No, no.
mistaken.
There's one in upstate New York for Lee Stefanik's, but that hasn't been called yet. And
Right.
there's two in Florida.
In Florida.
And I'm not going to ask you for any internal polling that you've seen or anything that you might have heard, but based on what your sense is, because you truly are, I think, from a as a politician, and I mean that in not in a pejorative sense, but in a good sense, you have a hugely accurate finger on the pulse of how people vote. You have that down. Do you have a sense that there's a possibility that we could actually pick up some of these Republican seats with the way people are feeling now?
It's not likely,
Right.
but I do think it's possible. And I say that because I do see public opinion shifting. Now, again, I'm talking about in New Jersey in my district, which is still Democratic. But you have people that were Republican and voted for Trump who seem very dissatisfied with what's happening. And a lot of it relates to the economy. So I would say probably not, but I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a Democrat elected in one of these districts, in one of these Republican districts.
Yeah, I mean it's and we only need three, right? To
That's right.
which is
Well, we have three in New Jersey. If we can get them to, I keep
well,
telling, I've been sort of targeting the three New Jersey guys and say, look, why don't you just change your mind and vote against the Medicaid cuts? Because there are three Republicans in New Jersey, and we only need three, so you could do it.
well, it's interesting because you had Jeff Andrew, who's the for people who are not from New Jersey, used to be a Democrat, then became a
Right.
Republican, then became like not just a Republican, but a serious MAGA Republican.
Yes.
From New Jersey's all the way down in South Jersey from Cape
Right.
May, if anybody knows
The
where that's
poorest part of the state.
the poorest part of the state, who came out pounding his chest right before this blueprint vote a couple weeks ago, saying, "I will never vote for anything that cuts Medicaid," and then, of course, turned around and immediately voted
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
blueprint that would cut Medicaid. So, what are they afraid of? You think they're just afraid of a primary? You think they're afraid
Yeah.
of Elon Musk funding a primary against them,
Yes,
or
that's
what's
exactly what they're afraid of. Yes, they're afraid that he could spend millions of dollars defeating them in a primary. Um, but what they said to the public was, well, this budget resolution is only a framework. It
right?
doesn't mean we have to vote to cut Medicaid. So, at some point, they're going to have to decide whether they're going to stand up or not.
But let's do the math because it's your committee. What was it? 440 million billion or 880? I can't remember the number. What
880 at minimum.
eight
8
880, right? So
billion. Billion.
880 from your committee. Is there
Right.
any way in hell that you could cut 880
No way.
billion dollars without touching Medicaid?
No, in fact, we sent a letter, myself and the budget ranking member sent a letter to CBO a couple of weeks ago. And they came back last week and said, at the most, our committee could cut 80 of the 880. And the other 800 would have to come from Medicaid. So you don't have to believe me. This is the bipartisan Congressional Budget Office. And keep in mind that this budget resolution says that another 500 billion has to come from across the board. So there's instructions to our committee 880. There's instructions to other committee for other amounts. But then in addition to that, there has to be an across the board cut of another 500 billion. And a lot of that's going to come out of our committee as well. So you're talking $1 trillion here that could be cut from Medicaid.
Does this budget framework that they all voted for, does that obligate you to anything, or is that just a virtue signaling kind of thing?
No, I mean well, if the committees don't follow it, then it falls apart and it doesn't happen.
Right.
And
So it doesn't really
this is what
obligate
we're
them to
trying to
anything.
do. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
So why would the leadership make them vote on something that Democrats can then say, you voted to cut $880 billion out of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and then they don't actually do it? Like they've already taken the
Yeah.
hit.
It
What
makes no sense. I mean, I really think because you're very smart politically that the rank and file Republicans realize that this vote is to cut Medicaid by that much is potentially damaging to their career, right, in the
sure.
next election. But I think that what happened is many of them, this is what they tell me privately, did not expect Donald Trump to be elected. They didn't think he was going to win, right? And then when they saw that he did, now they're even more fearful. because they're saying, "Oh my God, I never thought this guy was going to win. I thought that he was, too far to the right and all the things he was talking about, and so, maybe I can't cross him, and I have to go along with what he's suggesting because of the potential of a primary challenge, whatever, even though it's against the best interests of my district." And that's what I think is going on.
I have one last question for you because I know we're almost at time, or actually we are at time, but I've never asked you this or asked any member of this, but it's been on my mind a lot. On January 6th, 2021, a lot of you, I don't know where you were that day, but
I
a
was
lot
right here in the
you were
seat.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but a lot of people were hiding, not effectively hiding, but they were sheltering in place in the very chamber where Donald Trump delivered his address the other day, which to me was just startling to watch him walk into that chamber and be applauded by a lot of the same people who at the time were fearful for their lives. And, I wonder if especially your Republican colleagues have this theory that, well, this guy unleashed a mob that almost killed us once. And if we don't do what he wants, it's not just about losing a primary. It's not just about being funded, having Elon Musk fund a primary against us. But this guy is not joking around. I mean, Musk can tweet something out to his millions and millions of followers. They will come for our families. They will come for us personally. I know a lot of people are afraid for their personal safety. And it's not a joke because it happened once. And the people who came for you we're all pardoned. And so that maybe sends a signal to other people that, hey, go ahead and do what if the president wills it, go do it because there's nothing to it, right? Nobody's gonna hold you accountable. The president will take care of you. Do you think a lot of your I mean, is there a sense, especially among your Republican colleagues, of just I mean, I wouldn't blame them, but just personal fear, not just for their careers, but also just for their safety and for their family's safety?
I would hope not. I mean, I haven't heard that from them so that I can say positively that what you're saying is the case. But so I can't say that. But I will say that it's important that you bring it up, Julie, because I do see what's happening here, and you've told me this yourself, is like a prelude to a possible dictatorship, right, by Trump. And this kind of intimidation, where you start to fear for your family and your life, is the way that totalitarian states, take over, or dictators take over. And so I think it's important that you mention it because that is my greatest fear, right? When I hear him cozying up to Putin, saying that the democracy, which is Ukraine, is the aggressor and not the dictator Putin. I see the types of things that could lead to dictatorship here, and we're not beyond it as much as we like to think we are, and certainly intimidation of your politicians and your country's legislature, is a way to get to that point. So it's kind of sad. I don't really like to end on this because I like to be optimistic and tell people, look, keep fighting. We can change this. We can change this policy, and I do believe that. But you have to keep in mind what you said is that this is how dictators eventually succeed.
Do you believe in your heart of hearts that he's gonna leave in 4 years?
Well, I don't think he would want to. It's interesting that you say that because on the one hand, I fear that if he thinks that he's going to leave and he can't run again, then he feels he's totally unhinged and can do whatever he wants, right? But part of what I said to you tonight was that we can get him to change his mind and the Republican Party to change their mind on a lot of these terrible policies we've discussed because they want to be reelected, right? So if he thinks that he can't run again, then he's totally unhinged and does whatever he pleases, which is a disaster, right? But so he may very well think that he can run again somehow, and that's why he worries about public opinion. But I hope we're going to obviously say that the Constitution doesn't allow you to run again. You can't run again, and hopefully there are enough people that will uphold the Constitution and not allow that.
All right, let's end on a positive note because I don't want people to go
Yeah,
and jump out of
please,
a window.
please.
Tell me one good thing that Democrats are doing right now to really because I think people are just looking to you guys to do something. So what are you guys doing right now to make all of us sleep a little better at night, thinking that
Well,
our
we're
democracy may be
really
safe?
I think we're really trying to do like a lot of grassroots organizing to oppose these Medicaid cuts, for example. But a lot of the bad policies as well. So maybe the best example, if you want to end on a positive note, I was very much involved with the 9/11 health legislation to help people, first responders, and others that were made ill at 9/11 because they came and helped out or they lived in the area, whatever. We have one of the clinics for it at Rutgers in my district. And Musk came in and cut 20% of the staff at that program. Can you imagine for the first responders that help people at the World Trade Center site? So
Bag the blue,
I
right?
mean,
Save
my
people.
God. So we started organizing, and we actually, and a lot of us wrote letters, and finally we got a good number of the Republicans, congressmen from New York and New Jersey, to sign the letter, right? And within 2 or 3 days, they reneged, and they said we're not firing these people, we're bringing them back because they were so embarrassed. So I want you to understand it can happen, and it actually has happened to some extent that we've been able to get them to change their minds. So
All
that's
right.
the
So
optimistic note.
that's actually great because I think people need to know, and people who watch this, and I know this will be rebroadcast, but people who don't are not seeing it live, but will be seeing it later. I just that's such a good positive thing to end on because I think a lot of people feel like one person doesn't make a difference or showing up to a town hall doesn't make a difference. My message to people is if you're a congressman, especially if you're a Republican congressman, is not holding a town hall, hold one yourself. and and invite your neighbors and leave an empty chair for them if they don't show up, and call your press, the local media, and tell them to come and listen to you because they work for you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you work for the people of the 6th congressional district of New Jersey, and Tom Kaine, who's a Republican member of Congress in the adjacent district, works for the people of the 7th congressional district of New Jersey, though he doesn't hold town hall meetings. So maybe if he doesn't hold one, maybe people can invite you to come to his district
Well,
and you can tell them what's going on. I don't know if you do
well,
that, but I mean,
no,
they
you're
can
right.
show up to yours.
You're right, and also the way the media is now with social media and everything. Even an example of what we're doing now. There's so many opportunities to get the word out, right? It's not like you
Right,
have to be on broadcast TV or whatever. So
right.
this is another way to get the word out. What we're doing now.
Yeah, fantastic. Congressman Pallone, my very old dear friend who I truly just love. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to not just to me, but to all the folks listening right now and to all the people who'll be watching this in rebroadcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Take care.